Ambassador Zenthkar of the Galactic Council straightened his forearms as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be humanity's final diplomatic warning. The massive crystalline chamber hummed with the translated voices of 1,000 species, each representative more alien than the last. At the center of it all sat the human delegation, 5 ordinary-looking bipeds who had somehow become the most feared negotiators in known space. The Vorthak Empire had been testing boundaries again. Their latest transgression involved the systematic harvesting of primitive civilizations in the Outer Rim, a practice that technically violated 17 different galactic treaties. The Vorthak, with their chitinous armor and razor-sharp mandibles, had been the galaxy's apex predators for over 3 million years. They had crushed countless species, absorbed their technologies, and built an empire that spanned 4 galactic arms. The human delegation requests permission to address the council, announced Sarah Chen, the lead human ambassador. Her voice carried none of the usual diplomatic pleasantries that other species had come to expect. There was something different about her tone today, something that made even the ancient ethereal collective shift nervously in their energy fields. Zenthkar's translator implant struggled with the subtle undertones in human speech. These creatures had evolved on a death world, where everything from the weather to the wildlife tried to kill them daily. Yet somehow, they had developed the most complex diplomatic language in the known galaxy. They could say one thing and mean 17 different things, depending on context, tone, and body language. The chair recognizes Ambassador Chen of the Terran Federation, Zenthkar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber's acoustic amplifiers. Sarah stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. The other 4 humans remained seated, but their eyes tracked every movement in the chamber with predatory focus. It was a subtle reminder that humans were pack hunters who had clawed their way to the top of their planet's food chain through cooperation and strategic thinking. Honorable representatives, Sarah began, her words measured and precise. For the past 47 years, the Terran Federation has participated in this council with nothing but respect for galactic law and order. We have contributed our technologies freely. We have shared our medical advances. We have opened our trade routes and welcomed refugees from dozens of conflicts we had no part in starting. The chamber fell silent. Even the ever-chattering hive minds of Sector 7 stopped their constant buzzing to listen. In return, we have asked for only one thing: that the same laws that govern humanity be applied equally to all members of this council. Sarah's eyes swept across the assembled delegates, lingering on the Vorthak section where General Krexmore sat with his honor guard. Today, we present evidence that the Vorthak Empire has violated the Galactic Protection Accords by harvesting 17 pre-spaceflight civilizations in the past standard year. Holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber, showing detailed footage of Vorthak harvesting fleets stripping entire worlds of their populations. The images were brutal cities burning, population centers being emptied, and terrified alien faces pressed against the viewing ports of massive transport ships. General Krexmore rose from his seat, his massive frame casting shadows across several smaller delegations. The Vorthak Empire objects to this accusation. The species in question were clearly inferior and destined for extinction. We merely accelerated their inevitable fate while gaining useful biomass for our expansion efforts. A ripple of unease went through the chamber. The Vorthak had always been direct about their methods, but openly admitting to genocide in front of the council was unusual, even for them. Sarah nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. I see. So the Vorthak Empire admits to the harvesting but claims it was justified due to the perceived inferiority of the target species. Correct. Krexmore clicked his mandibles in what passed for a Vorthak smile. The strong must guide the weak. It is the natural order. Natural order. Sarah repeated the words, letting them hang in the air. General, I'm curious about your definition of strength. The 17 species you harvested had developed agriculture, written language, and basic mathematics. Several had reached their industrial ages. By what metric did you determine they were inferior? Krexmore's armor plates shifted a sign of irritation among his species. They lacked spaceflight. They had not joined the galactic community. By council law, they are fair game for any member species willing to shoulder the administrative burden of their incorporation. Sarah turned to address the council as a whole. And here we see the fundamental issue that humanity can no longer tolerate. The Galactic Protection Accords were written to prevent exactly this kind of exploitation. Yet, when violations are brought before this body, they are dismissed through technicalities and legal loopholes. The ethereal collective's representative pulsed with concerned energy patterns. Ambassador Chen, surely you understand the complexity of galactic governance. The Vorthak Empire has been a stabilizing force in their sector for millennia. Their methods may seem harsh to younger species, but they maintain order. Order. Sarah's voice took on a harder edge. Tell me, honored ethereal, would you call the systematic enslavement and consumption of 17 billion sentient beings order? Would you describe the strip mining of their homeworlds and the erasure of their cultures as stability? The chamber erupted in translated arguments as dozens of species began debating among themselves. The smaller, younger civilizations supported humanity's position, while the older, more established powers seemed reluctant to challenge the status quo. Through it all, General Crexmore remained standing, his honor guard flanking him with weapons clearly visible. It was a not-so-subtle reminder that the Vorthak Empire had built their position through military might, not diplomatic consensus. Enough! Zenthkar's voice boomed through the chamber's speakers. Ambassador Chen, what exactly does humanity propose? The evidence you present is concerning, but the Vorthak Empire's actions, while morally questionable, do not technically violate current council law. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she looked genuinely pleased. Chairman Zenthkar, humanity proposes a simple amendment to the Galactic Protection Accords. Any species that demonstrates sentience through the development of written language and basic mathematics shall be granted automatic protection under council law, regardless of their technological level. The proposal was reasonable, logical, and completely impossible to argue against on moral grounds. It was also a direct threat to the expansion policies of a dozen major powers who relied on harvesting primitive worlds for resources and slave labor. Preposterous! General Crexmore's voice rose above the growing murmur of conversations. Such protection would prevent legitimate expansion efforts throughout the galaxy. The strong would be forced to support the weak, disrupting natural evolutionary pressures. Sarah's expression remained calm, but her fellow humans exchanged glances that didn't go unnoticed by the more perceptive species in attendance. General, are you saying that the Vorthak Empire opposes protection for sentient beings based solely on their technological development? I am saying that inferior species serve the galaxy best by contributing to the success of their betters, Crexmore declared. The Vorthak Empire will not support legislation that interferes with this natural process. The human delegation sat in perfect silence for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in galactic politics. When Sarah finally spoke, her words were measured and precise. But underneath them lay something that made every predator species in the chamber suddenly pay attention. I see. And how many other members of this council share the Vorthak Empire's position on this matter? One by one, the representatives of the galaxy's major powers voiced their opposition to humanity's proposal. The hegemony of suns claimed it would interfere with their mining rights. The Crystalline Confederacy argued it would disrupt established trade agreements. The Biosynthesis Collective stated it would prevent them from acquiring necessary genetic material for their reproduction cycles. With each declaration, Sarah made careful notes on a small device, while her fellow humans maintained their unnervingly calm demeanor. Finally, when the last objection had been recorded, she looked up at Chairman Zenthkar. Mr. Chairman, I believe we have heard enough testimony to move forward. The Terran Federation formally requests a vote on our proposed amendment to the Galactic Protection Accords. Zenthkar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit he had developed during particularly stressful council sessions. Very well. All those in favor of the human proposal? The vote was swift and decisive. 47 species voted in favor, mostly younger civilizations and those who had been victims of expansion campaigns themselves. 133 species voted against, led by the galaxy's established powers. The amendment failed by a massive margin. Sarah stood again, gathering her notes with deliberate care. Mr. Chairman, the Terran Federation thanks this council for its time and consideration. We have received a clear message about the galaxy's priorities, and we will adjust our policies accordingly. Something in her tone made Chairman Zenthkar deeply uncomfortable. Ambassador Chen, surely humanity doesn't intend to withdraw from the council over this single issue? Oh no, Mr. Chairman. Sarah replied with that same pleasant smile that had been unsettling observers all day. Humanity has no intention of withdrawing from galactic society. We simply need to reconsider our approach to diplomacy. The human delegation filed out of the chamber in perfect formation, leaving behind a room full of aliens who couldn't quite shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed. They were right to be concerned. For 47 years, humanity had played by the galaxy's rules, hoping that reason and morality would eventually prevail. They had just learned that hope was a luxury the galaxy couldn't afford. In her private quarters aboard the human diplomatic vessel, Sarah Chen sat down at her secure communication terminal and composed a message that would change the course of galactic history. The recipient was Admiral Elizabeth Kane, commander of the Terran Federation's Humanitarian Relief Corps, a military force that officially didn't exist but maintained a fleet of the most advanced warships ever constructed. Elizabeth, the message began. The council vote failed as expected. The galaxy has made its position clear regarding the protection of sentient life. I believe it's time to demonstrate humanity's position on the same subject. Authorization Code, Omega 77 Alpha. You have permission to begin humanitarian operations in the Outer Rim. Rules of engagement. Protect the innocent by any means necessary. Sarah encrypted the message and sent it through quantum channels that would reach Earth in less than 6 hours. Then she leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The galaxy had chosen to ignore humanity's polite requests for justice. They were about to learn why that had been a mistake. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations belonging to a dozen different intelligence services detected massive energy signatures as something very large began moving through human space. The Terran Federation's military had been conspicuously absent from galactic affairs for nearly 5 decades, leading most species to assume that humanity relied primarily on diplomatic solutions to conflicts. They were about to discover just how wrong that assumption had been. General Crexmore returned to his flagship feeling pleased with the day's events. The humans had been put in their place, and the established order remained intact. His species had been harvesting inferior civilizations for millions of years, and no collection of soft-spoken diplomats was going to change that now. He was reviewing reports from his latest harvesting operation when his communications officer approached with obvious reluctance. "General, we are receiving reports from Fleet Commander Vekthar in the Outer Rim. He says there's something you need to see." The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of Vorthak space in the Outer Rim territories. Dozens of red warning indicators marked the locations of harvesting operations and processing facilities. But now, scattered throughout the display, were new markers in an ominous shade of blue. "What am I looking at?" Crexmore demanded. "Unknown vessels, sir. They appeared simultaneously at 17 different locations, all of them sites where we have active harvesting operations. The ships don't match any design in our databases, but their quantum signatures suggest human origin." Crexmore's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his kind. "Impossible. Human ships are slow, lightly armed civilian transports. Their military exists only in rumor and speculation. Sir, with respect, I don't think these are rumors anymore." The first engagement occurred at the Xerion system, where a Vorthak harvesting fleet was in the process of emptying the planet's population centers. The operation was proceeding normally when space seemed to fold in on itself, and suddenly there were ships where none had been before. The vessels that emerged from what could only be advanced jump technology were unlike anything in the Vorthak databases. They were sleek and predatory, their hull designs suggesting both beauty and lethality. Most disturbing of all, they moved with a coordination that spoke of advanced artificial intelligence and tactical planning far beyond what the galaxy had believed humans capable of. Commander Vekthar, leading the harvesting operation from his flagship Bone Crusher, immediately opened communication channels with the unknown vessels. "Unidentified ships, you are interfering with a legitimate Vorthak Empire operation authorized under Galactic Council regulations. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The response came in perfect Vorthak, spoken with the same calm precision that had characterized Ambassador Chen's address to the Council earlier that day. "Commander Vekthar, this is Admiral Sarah Williams of the Terran Federation Humanitarian Relief Corps. You are ordered to immediately cease harvesting operations and release all captured personnel. You have 60 seconds to comply." Vekthar's laugh was a chittering sound that his crew found deeply unsettling. "Admiral Williams, You command perhaps a dozen vessels against my fleet of 200. Your threats are meaningless. Commander, you seem to be under the impression that this is a negotiation. It is not. You have 53 seconds remaining. The Vorthak commander signaled his weapons officers to target the lead human vessel. His ship's massive plasma cannons, each one capable of reducing a small moon to vapor, locked onto the sleek predator that had dared to challenge his authority. 30 seconds, Commander. Vakthar had had enough of human arrogance. All ships, open fire. Destroy these insects. 200 Vorthak warships unleashed their fury simultaneously, filling space with enough destructive energy to sterilize a continent. The plasma barrage struck the human formation with pinpoint accuracy, creating a brilliant light show visible from the planet's surface. When the light faded, the human ships were gone. Vakthar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before his sensor operator's panicked voice cut through his celebration. Commander, they're still here. All human vessels are intact and our weapons had no effect. The impossible truth was displayed on every screen in the Vorthak fleet. The human ships had not dodged the attack, they had absorbed it. Their hulls showed no damage, no energy discharge, nothing to suggest they had just survived the combined firepower of an entire battle fleet. Time's up, Commander. What happened next would be studied by military strategists across the galaxy for centuries to come. The human ships didn't return fire with energy weapons or missiles. Instead, they simply moved. The speed was incomprehensible. One moment the human vessels were distant specks on the tactical display. The next, they were among the Vorthak fleet, moving between the massive warships like sharks through a school of fish. Every movement was precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. The first Vorthak ship to fall was the Bone Crusher itself. A human vessel no larger than a Vorthak courier ship somehow passed directly through its shields and hull, emerging on the other side completely unharmed while leaving behind a perfectly cylindrical hole that stretched from bow to stern. Similar scenes played out across the entire fleet. Human ships phased through Vorthak hulls as if they were made of mist, leaving destruction in their wake. In less than 10 minutes, 200 of the Vorthak Empire's finest warships had been reduced to drifting scrap metal. The human fleet then descended to the planet's surface and began the systematic destruction of every harvesting facility, processing center, and transport ship in the system. But they didn't stop there. Using technology that defied every known law of physics, they somehow reversed the entire harvesting process, returning millions of captured beings to their homeworld completely unharmed. The final message from Admiral Williams was broadcast across all Vorthak frequencies. The Terran Federation hereby declares all harvesting operations in violation of basic sentient rights to be acts of piracy. Any vessel found engaging in such activities will be stopped by any means necessary. This is your only warning. Similar scenes played out simultaneously across 17 different systems, all of them sites of active Vorthak harvesting operations. In the span of a single day, the most feared military force in the galaxy had been systematically dismantled by an enemy they had dismissed as weak and technologically inferior. The news reached General Crexmore 6 hours later, along with similar reports from a dozen other member species who had opposed humanity's proposal at the Council. The hegemony of suns had lost their entire mining operation in the Kepler sector. The Crystalline Confederacy's trade vessels had been disabled and their cargo holds full of enslaved beings emptied. The Biosynthesis Collective's genetic harvesting facilities had simply vanished, along with any trace that they had ever existed. For the first time in his 300-year military career, General Crexmore felt something that his species had nearly forgotten: fear. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's 47 years of patience had not been weakness. It had been mercy. And mercy, as every species was about to discover, was a gift that could be withdrawn. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's 12,000-year history. Representatives who normally took weeks to respond to communications had arrived within hours. Species that hadn't spoken to each other in centuries were now huddled together in worried clusters, sharing intelligence reports and trying to understand what had just happened to their carefully ordered galaxy. Chairman Zenthkar called the session to order with 3 of his forearms trembling visibly. The reports coming in from across the galaxy painted a picture that challenged everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. The chair recognizes General Crexmore of the Vorthak Empire, Zenthkar announced, though his usual ceremonial formality was strained. The massive Vorthak general looked like he had aged decades in the past 24 hours. His usually gleaming armor was dulled, and his proud posture had been replaced by something approaching defeat. "Honorable representatives," Crexmore began, his voice lacking its usual arrogant confidence. "The Vorthak Empire has suffered the complete destruction of 17 battle fleets. Over 3,000 vessels, including some of our most advanced dreadnoughts, have been reduced to scrap metal. The humans accomplished this with minimal losses. Current intelligence suggests they lost exactly 0 ships." A wave of shocked translations rippled through the chamber. The Vorthak Empire possessed the second largest military force in known space. The idea that they could be defeated so decisively was almost incomprehensible. Furthermore, Crexmore continued, "Our analysis of the engagement data reveals technology far beyond anything in our databases. Human vessels demonstrated the ability to phase through solid matter, manipulate space-time on a tactical scale, and deploy shielding systems that render conventional weapons completely ineffective." High Coordinator Vexlas of the Crystalline Confederacy rose from her resonating crystal matrix. "The Confederacy has experienced similar losses. Our trade operations in the Omega sector have been completely shut down. Human forces somehow transported 17 million enslaved workers back to their home systems in a matter of hours. The quantum energy required for such an operation should be impossible to generate or control." The reports continued for hours. The hegemony of suns described mining facilities that had been disassembled at the molecular level and then reassembled as thriving cities for the primitive species they had been exploiting. The Biosynthesis Collective's representative spoke in hushed tones about genetic harvesting operations that had simply ceased to exist, leaving no trace in space-time. Most disturbing of all were the accounts from species who had voted in favor of humanity's Protection Amendment. Their territories remained completely untouched. Human ships had been detected in their space, but only long enough to deliver massive care packages of food, medicine, and advanced technology. Dr. Yelnara of the Scientific Coalition had been analyzing the human technology demonstrations for the past 18 hours without rest. Her findings were more terrifying than any military defeat. "Distinguished colleagues," she began, her usually steady voice shaking, "we must accept the possibility that humanity has been deliberately concealing their true capabilities for nearly 5 decades. The technology they demonstrated yesterday suggests they have mastered principles of physics that our most advanced civilizations can barely theorize about." She activated a holographic display showing the aftermath of the Xerion engagement. "Observe the precision of their operations. Human vessels passed through Vorthak ships with surgical accuracy, disabling weapons and life support while leaving crew quarters intact. This suggests not only the ability to manipulate matter at the quantum level, but also real-time molecular scanning capabilities that allowed them to identify specific systems within enemy vessels. The implications hung heavy in the chamber air. A species capable of such precision could do far more than disable enemy ships. They could reach into any facility, any world, any vessel in the galaxy, and manipulate matter at will. But perhaps most concerning, Dr. Yelnara continued, is the coordination displayed across multiple star systems simultaneously. The human operations began within seconds of each other across distances that should require hours for even quantum communication. This suggests either faster than light information transmission, or some form of collective consciousness we don't understand. Ethereal collective representative Lumen pulsed with deep concern patterns. "Dr. Yelnara, are you suggesting that humanity has been monitoring our operations across the entire galaxy?" "I'm suggesting something far more disturbing. The precision of their intelligence gathering indicates they have been watching everything. Every harvesting operation, every slave trade route, every exploitation of primitive species. They knew about all of it. For decades, the chamber fell into stunned silence as the full implications became clear. Humanity hadn't suddenly developed these capabilities in response to the council vote. They had possessed them all along, choosing instead to work through diplomatic channels for nearly 50 years. Ambassador Thexrin of the Merchant Guilds spoke what everyone was thinking. Why? Why would a species with such overwhelming technological superiority spend half a century trying to change things through negotiation? The answer came from an unexpected source. The chamber's main display activated, showing a familiar figure in human diplomatic attire. Ambassador Sarah Chen appeared to be speaking from the same vessel that had departed the council chambers just 1 day earlier. Honored representatives. Sarah's voice carried the same diplomatic tone they remembered, but now it seemed to contain layers of meaning they had missed before. I hope this emergency session has been productive. I understand you have questions about recent events. Chairman Zenthkar quickly recovered his composure. Ambassador Chen, the Terran Federation was not invited to this session. How are you accessing our secure communication systems? Sarah's smile was polite but carried an edge that made several species unconsciously reach for weapons they weren't permitted to carry in the council chambers. Mr. Chairman, humanity has been a member of this council for 47 years. Our access to galactic communication networks is quite comprehensive. The casual admission that humans had been monitoring their emergency session sent new waves of concern through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Chen, General. Krexmore's voice carried none of his usual bluster. The Vorthak Empire demands an explanation for yesterday's unprovoked attacks on our legitimate operations. Unprovoked? Sarah's expression remained pleasantly neutral, but her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. General, yesterday marked the end of our species' experiment with patience. For 47 years, humanity chose to work within established galactic systems because we believed that reason and moral arguments would eventually prevail. She gestured, and the chamber's displays filled with images from human databases, detailed recordings of atrocities committed by council member species across thousands of worlds over the past 5 decades. We documented everything, General. Every harvesting operation, every slave auction, every primitive world stripped of its population. We brought these crimes to the Council's attention through proper diplomatic channels 1,732 times. Each time, we were told that existing laws were adequate, that change must come slowly, that the galaxy's established order must be preserved. The images continued to cycle through the displays. Millions of beings herded into transport ships, worlds reduced to barren mining sites, entire civilizations erased to make room for agricultural operations. Yesterday, this council had the opportunity to take a simple step toward justice. The amendment we proposed would have protected sentient species based on the most basic criteria imaginable, the development of written language and mathematics. It was voted down by a margin of nearly 3-1. High Coordinator Vexlas found her voice. Ambassador, surely you understand that galactic governance requires compromise. Change cannot happen overnight. Change cannot happen overnight, Sarah repeated slowly. High Coordinator, how long do you believe it should take to stop the systematic murder of billions of sentient beings? What would constitute a reasonable timeline for ending slavery on a galactic scale? The question hung in the air unanswered. No one in the chamber wanted to state explicitly that their compromises and gradual change meant accepting continued atrocities as the cost of maintaining political stability. Humanity spent 47 years learning about your civilization, Sarah continued. We studied your technologies, your cultures, your political systems. We contributed our own knowledge freely, hoping that increased cooperation would lead to increased compassion. Instead, we learned that the galaxy's power structures are specifically designed to preserve the privilege of strong species at the expense of weak ones. Dr. Yelnara spoke up, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. Ambassador Chen, our analysis suggests that humanity has possessed advanced technological capabilities for decades. Why did you choose diplomacy when you could have simply imposed your will through force? Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Doctor, that question reveals an interesting difference in how our species view power. You assume that the ability to impose one's will automatically makes it the correct course of action. Humans find that perspective troubling. She paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing. We chose diplomacy because we hoped the galaxy could be convinced to choose justice willingly. A civilization that embraces moral behavior because it's forced to do so hasn't actually become moral. It has simply become controlled. The implications were staggering. Humanity had the power to enforce their will on the entire galaxy but had chosen instead to spend 5 decades hoping for voluntary moral improvement. However, Sarah's tone shifted subtly. Yesterday's vote demonstrated that voluntary moral improvement is not going to occur within a time frame that prevents the continued suffering of billions of innocent beings. Humanity has therefore decided to implement a more direct approach to galactic reform. Warning indicators began flashing on communication consoles throughout the chamber. as encrypted messages flooded the galactic networks. The timing was perfect. Sarah had waited for maximum dramatic effect before revealing the next phase of human operations. "What you are receiving now," Sarah explained, "are revised shipping schedules, trade route modifications, and operational guidelines for every member species of this council. Humanity is implementing new regulations regarding the treatment of sentient life, and we expect full compliance within 30 standard days." General Crexmore struggled to his feet, his massive frame shaking with rage. "Ambassador, the Vorthak Empire will not be dictated to by a species that has revealed itself as nothing more than highly advanced pirates." "Pirates?" Sarah's laugh was genuinely amused. "General, pirates take things that don't belong to them. Everything humanity has done in the past 24 hours involved liberating beings who had been taken against their will and returning stolen resources to their rightful owners. If anyone in this conversation fits the definition of piracy, it would be the species that has spent 3 million years harvesting civilizations for biomass." The truth of her words was undeniable, and Crexmore's silence spoke volumes about the Vorthak Empire's inability to dispute the characterization. Ambassador Thexerin of the Merchant Guilds spoke carefully. "Ambassador Chen, the regulations you've distributed would essentially shut down half the galaxy's economy. The disruption to established trade relationships would be catastrophic." "Ambassador Thexerin, you're absolutely correct. The elimination of slavery, harvesting operations, and resource extraction from primitive worlds will indeed require significant economic adjustments. Humanity is prepared to assist with this transition by providing alternative technologies and trade opportunities that don't depend on the exploitation of sentient beings." The offer was reasonable, generous even, but it was clearly non-negotiable. Species that had built their entire economies around exploitation would need to find new ways to prosper, with humanity's help if they were cooperative, or despite humanity's opposition if they were not. Chairman Zenthkar finally found his voice. "Ambassador Chen, what you're proposing amounts to the complete restructuring of galactic civilization. No single species has the right to impose such changes unilaterally." "Mr. Chairman," Sarah's voice took on the same pleasant tone she had used when delivering humanity's initial proposal, "I think you may be misunderstanding the situation. Humanity is not asking for permission to protect innocent life. We are informing you of our intentions as a courtesy to former colleagues." The distinction was crucial. Humanity was no longer operating within the Council's framework. They were operating according to their own moral imperatives and simply keeping the galaxy informed of their actions. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "calling these changes unilateral suggests that the current system was created through some form of democratic consensus. The galaxy's power structure was built by conquest, maintained through force, and justified through legal frameworks designed by the victors. Humanity is simply introducing a different set of priorities." The chamber erupted in arguments as species tried to process the implications. Some demanded military action against humanity, others called for negotiation, and a few quietly began calculating whether cooperation might be their safest option. Through it all, Ambassador Chen waited patiently for the chaos to subside. When it finally did, her next words would reshape galactic politics forever. "Honored representatives, humanity understands that our recent actions have created uncertainty about the future. To address this concern, we would like to extend an invitation to any species interested in participating in the new galactic order we're establishing." She gestured, and the chamber's displays showed images of worlds that had been liberated from exploitation. Former slave populations were rebuilding their cities with advanced human technology. Previously harvested civilizations were developing spaceflight capabilities with human assistance. Worlds that had been stripped of resources were being restored to their original ecological states. These worlds represent the first phase of what we call the Humanitarian Development Project. Species that choose to participate will receive access to advanced technologies, medical treatments, and educational resources. In exchange, they agree to protect sentient life within their territories and contribute to the defense of primitive worlds against exploitation. The offer was staggering in its scope. Humanity was essentially proposing to uplift the entire galaxy, sharing technologies that would advance participating civilizations by centuries or millennia. The only price was abandoning practices that most species had considered fundamental to their survival. High Coordinator Vexlas was the first to voice the question everyone was thinking. "Ambassador Chen, What happens to species that choose not to participate in your development project? Sarah's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes made even the bravest warriors in the chamber feel suddenly vulnerable. High Coordinator, non-participating species are free to continue their current practices within their own territories. However, they should understand that humanity will respond to any aggression against protected worlds or species with appropriate force. The euphemism, appropriate force, had just taken on a terrifying new meaning. Humanity had demonstrated they could disable entire battle fleets without losing a single ship. The phrase suggested that yesterday's operations had been a gentle warning compared to what humans were capable of when truly motivated. General Krexmore made one final attempt to salvage his species' position. Ambassador, the Vorthak Empire has maintained stability in our sector for 3 million years. Our removal would create a power vacuum that would lead to chaos and suffering. General, Sarah replied, your species has created suffering on an industrial scale for 3 million years. The chaos that might result from your absence cannot possibly be worse than the systematic atrocities you have perpetuated. However, humanity is not interested in creating power vacuums. The chamber's displays shifted to show detailed star charts of Vorthak space. Red markers indicated current military installations and harvesting facilities. Blue markers showed proposed locations for humanitarian development centers and defense stations. We are prepared to assume responsibility for maintaining order in any sector where existing authority structures have proven inadequate to protect sentient life. This transition can happen cooperatively, or it can happen through direct intervention. The choice belongs to the species currently claiming authority in those sectors. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't interested in conquest for its own sake, they were interested in replacing systems of exploitation with systems of protection. Species that could adapt to this new paradigm would be welcome partners, those that could not would be replaced. As the implications settled in, Chairman Zenthkar realized that this emergency session had not been a negotiation or even a formal diplomatic exchange. It had been humanity's way of announcing that the galaxy's power structure was changing. Whether the current power holders liked it or not, the age of exploitation was ending. The age of human oversight was beginning, and there was absolutely nothing the Galaxy Council could do to stop it. 3 years had passed since humanity revealed its true capabilities to the galaxy, and the transformation was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station orbiting New Geneva, watching as another fleet of former slave ships was converted into passenger transports for voluntary colonists. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, a sprawling complex that served as the administrative center for what had become known as the Human Protection Zone. Nearly 40% of the galaxy now operated under human oversight, and the results spoke for themselves. Dr. Yelnara of the Scientific Coalition approached Sarah's position, her movement conveying the relaxed confidence that had replaced the fear that once characterized interactions with human representatives. Over the past 3 years, she had become humanity's closest alien collaborator, helping to develop the integration protocols that allowed other species to benefit from human technology. Ambassador Chen, the quarterly progress reports are ready for your review, Dr. Yelnara said, offering a data crystal that contained information that would have been impossible to compile under the old galactic order. Sarah accepted the crystal with a grateful nod. The relationship between humanity and the Scientific Coalition had become one of the success stories of the new era. Dr. Yelnara's species had enthusiastically embraced the opportunity to study human technology, and in exchange, they had provided crucial insights into the biological and psychological needs of the hundreds of species now under human protection. How are the Keth Mori adaptation centers progressing? Sarah asked, referring to one of the species that had been recently liberated from Vorthak harvesting operations. Remarkably well, Dr. Yelnara replied with obvious satisfaction. Their population has stabilized at pre-harvesting levels, and they've managed to rebuild 7 of their major cities using the hybrid technology platforms your engineers developed. More importantly, their cultural recovery programs have successfully preserved most of their pre-contact traditions and languages. Sarah smiled as she reviewed the data. The Keth Mori had been one of the most challenging cases, a species whose homeworld had been strip-mined by the Vorthak to the point where traditional agriculture was impossible. Human terraforming technology had restored the planet's ecosystem, but the psychological trauma of losing 90% of their population to harvesting operations had required more delicate intervention. Their request for membership in the protection zone has been approved, Sarah informed Dr. Yelnara. They'll receive full technological integration support and defense guarantees within the next 6 months. The protection zone had evolved far beyond humanity's original concept. What had begun as a simple effort to prevent exploitation had grown into a comprehensive system of mutual cooperation and shared defense. Species that joined received access to human technology and protection from aggression. In exchange, they contributed their unique capabilities to the collective security and development of the zone. The results had exceeded even humanity's optimistic projections. Worlds that had been devastated by harvesting operations were now thriving centers of commerce and culture. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together on joint research projects. Most importantly, the rate of exploitation and warfare throughout the galaxy had dropped to levels not seen since before the rise of the major empires. Ambassador, Dr. Yelnara's tone grew more serious. There's something else in the reports that requires your attention. Intelligence suggests that the hegemony of suns is preparing some form of military action against protection zone territories. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted slightly, a subtle reminder that beneath the diplomatic facade, humans remained the galaxy's most capable predators. What kind of military action? Our sources indicate they're massing forces near the Proxima Junction. The fleet composition suggests they're planning to attack the relief operations in the Xerion system. The Proxima Junction was strategically important. It controlled access to nearly a dozen star systems that had been recently liberated from exploitation. More importantly, it was the location of one of humanity's largest humanitarian development projects, where millions of former slaves were being helped to rebuild their civilizations. Sarah activated her personal communication device and spoke a series of codes that Dr. Yelnara's translator couldn't process. Within minutes, the diplomatic station's alert systems began broadcasting priority messages to human vessels throughout the sector. Dr. Yelnara, please inform the scientific coalition that we may need to implement emergency protocols in the Proxima region. I want all civilian personnel evacuated to minimum safe distance within 12 hours. The efficiency of the human response was still breathtaking to observe. Orders given on the diplomatic station were being carried out by ships thousands of light years away, within minutes. The humans had somehow created a command and communication network that operated faster than the speed of light, a capability that still defied scientific explanation. Ambassador, Dr. Yelnara said carefully, the hegemony commands nearly 2,000 vessels. Even considering your technological advantages, a direct confrontation could be costly. Sarah's smile carried the same mixture of patience and confidence that had characterized human diplomacy since the beginning of their involvement in galactic affairs. Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but humanity learned some valuable lessons during our initial interventions 3 years ago. We've made certain improvements to our approach. The conversation was interrupted by an incoming transmission from Admiral Elizabeth Kane, now commanding the Human Protection Fleet from her flagship Determination. The Admiral's image appeared on the observation deck's main display, and her expression suggested she was looking forward to the coming engagement. Ambassador Chen, Admiral Kane reported, reconnaissance confirms hegemony forces are preparing to move on Proxima within the next 18 hours. Fleet composition includes 47 heavy dreadnoughts, 112 battle cruisers, and supporting vessels. They appear to be planning a direct assault on the humanitarian facilities. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Admiral, what's your assessment of their tactical objectives? They're not trying to win, Ambassador. This looks like a demonstration of force. They want to prove that the protection zone can be challenged militarily. My guess is they're hoping that other species will see human casualties and decide we're not as invincible as we appear. The analysis made sense. The hegemony of suns had been one of the most vocal opponents of human intervention, but they had been careful to avoid direct confrontation for the past 3 years. A successful attack on humanitarian operations would indeed send a message to the rest of the galaxy that humanity could be challenged. Admiral, Sarah said, you have authorization to defend protection zone operations by any means necessary. However, I want this to be educational for the rest of the galaxy. Make sure our response leaves no doubt about humanity's commitment to protecting innocent life. Admiral Kane's smile was the expression of a predator who had been given permission to hunt. Understood, Ambassador. We'll make sure the lesson is memorable. The transmission ended, and Dr. Yelnara found herself once again marveling at the casual confidence humans displayed when facing overwhelming odds. 2,000 enemy vessels should have been cause for concern, but the humans seemed to view it as an opportunity for demonstration. Dr. Yel Nara, Sarah said, would you like to observe the engagement from a safe distance? I think the scientific coalition would benefit from seeing humanity's current military capabilities. The offer was both generous and ominous. Humanity was apparently so confident in their military superiority that they were willing to allow alien observers to study their tactics in real time. Ambassador, I would be honored to observe, but I must ask, are you certain that 2,000 enemy vessels don't pose a significant threat to your forces? Sarah's laugh was genuinely amused. Doctor, the fleet that Admiral Kane commands represents less than 1% of humanity's current military capability. The hegemony's entire navy would be insufficient to challenge a single one of our sector defense forces. The casual revelation that humanity possessed military forces hundreds of times larger than what they had already demonstrated sent a chill through Dr. Yelnara's scientific mind. If humans could field such overwhelming force, why hadn't they simply conquered the galaxy outright years ago? As if reading her thoughts, Sarah continued, humanity learned long ago that military conquest creates subjects, not allies. We prefer to demonstrate our capabilities only when necessary to protect innocent life. The hegemony's planned attack on humanitarian operations makes such a demonstration necessary. 18 hours later, Dr. Yelnara found herself aboard the observation vessel Scientific Curiosity, positioned at what human tactical analysts assured her was a safe distance from the coming engagement. The ship's sensors were focused on the Proxima Junction, where hegemony forces had begun their assault on humanitarian facilities. The attack began with a massive barrage of plasma torpedoes and antimatter missiles, enough destructive power to reduce a planet to molten slag. The hegemony forces had apparently decided that overwhelming firepower was their best chance of inflicting casualties on the mysteriously resilient human vessels. For several minutes, the Proxima Junction was obscured by the brilliant light of sustained weapons fire. When the energy discharge finally cleared, the humanitarian facilities remained completely intact, protected by some form of shielding technology that rendered the massive bombardment completely ineffective. Phase 1 complete, Admiral Kane's voice reported calmly through the communication link. Humanitarian facilities are secure. Beginning tactical response. What happened next redefined Dr. Yelnara's understanding of what constituted military superiority. Human vessels didn't engage the hegemony fleet directly. Instead, space around the enemy formation began to behave in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Hegemony ships found themselves unable to maneuver as gravity fields spontaneously appeared around their hulls, holding them in place like insects in amber. Weapons systems shut down as their power cores were somehow isolated from the rest of their ships. Communication arrays went silent as the electromagnetic spectrum around the fleet was manipulated to prevent signal transmission. Within 10 minutes, 2,000 of the galaxy's most advanced warships had been rendered completely helpless, without a single shot being fired in return. Admiral Kane, Dr. Yelnara transmitted, how is this possible? Your ships appear to be manipulating space-time itself. The Admiral's response carried the patient tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a student. Doctor, humanity spent several centuries developing our understanding of quantum mechanics before we achieved spaceflight. When we encountered other species, we discovered that most civilizations develop faster than light, travel through brute force engineering, rather than fundamental understanding of space-time manipulation. The explanation was both illuminating and terrifying. While other species had focused on building bigger engines and more powerful weapons, humanity had achieved true mastery over the basic forces of the universe. The hegemony fleet is now completely disabled, Admiral Kane continued. No casualties, no permanent damage to their vessels. However, they're going to remain in place until we've had an opportunity to conduct some educational demonstrations. Over the next 6 hours, the helpless hegemony fleet was treated to a comprehensive display of human capabilities. Their ship's computer systems were accessed and upgraded with detailed files documenting every atrocity they had committed over the past millennium. Their weapon designs were analyzed and improved, with the modifications implemented in real time to demonstrate human engineering superiority. Most impressively, the humans somehow transported the commanding officers from each hegemony vessel to a single location where they could observe recordings of every humanitarian operation they had planned to attack. The transport technology involved moving matter instantaneously across space without any visible mechanism. a capability that suggested humans had solved problems in physics that other species hadn't even realized existed. Fleet Admiral Mordeth of the Hegemony of Suns, Admiral Kane's voice addressed the enemy commander directly. You are being given the opportunity to observe the facilities your fleet intended to destroy. Please note that every being you plan to kill today is someone's child, parent, or loved one. The humanitarian centers you targeted provide medical care, education, and hope to millions of survivors of exploitation. The forced tour of humanitarian facilities was perhaps more devastating to hegemony morale than any military defeat could have been. Enemy officers were confronted with the faces and stories of the people they had planned to murder in order to make a political point. When the educational demonstrations were complete, Admiral Kane addressed the hegemony fleet one final time. Fleet Admiral Mordeth, your vessels and crews are being returned to hegemony space unharmed. However, you should understand that this engagement represents the absolute minimum level of force humanity is prepared to use in defense of innocent life. Any future attacks on protection zone territories or humanitarian operations will be met with responses calibrated to ensure they never happen again. The hegemony fleet found itself abruptly transported to the edge of their own territory, completely unharmed but carrying the unmistakable message that humanity possessed capabilities far beyond anything the galaxy had imagined possible. Dr. Yelnara spent the journey back to New Geneva reviewing the sensor data from the engagement. Every analysis confirmed the same impossible conclusion. Humanity had demonstrated the ability to manipulate matter, energy, space, and time at will. They could disable entire fleets without violence, transport matter instantaneously across galactic distances, and apparently modify the fundamental forces of physics to suit their tactical needs. Ambassador Chen, she asked as they disembarked at the diplomatic station, I must know, why haven't you simply taken control of the entire galaxy? You clearly possess the capability. Sarah's answer revealed the fundamental difference between humanity and every other species that had achieved galactic prominence. Doctor, power without consent creates enemies, not allies. Humanity learned this lesson through centuries of conflict on our homeworld. Every empire built through conquest eventually falls because subjects never stop looking for opportunities to rebel. She gestured toward the busy docking bays where ships from dozens of species were arriving with supplies, volunteers, and requests for membership in the protection zone. What we've built here is something different. A civilization based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. Species join the protection zone because they want to, not because they're forced to. They contribute to our collective defense because they're protecting their own homes and families, not because they're serving foreign masters. The wisdom of humanity's approach was evident in the results. The protection zone continued to expand as more species requested membership. Former enemies worked together on humanitarian projects. Most importantly, the galaxy's rate of exploitation and warfare had dropped to levels not seen in millions of years. Furthermore, Sarah continued, humanity believes that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than holding them down. Every species that joins the protection zone makes us all stronger. Every world we help rebuild becomes a center of innovation and culture. Every former slave who receives education and opportunity contributes to the collective advancement of galactic civilization. Dr. Yelnara nodded slowly as she began to understand the scope of humanity's vision. They weren't interested in ruling the galaxy, they were interested in transforming it into something better than it had ever been. The galaxy is beginning to remember what peace looks like, Sarah concluded. What cooperation can accomplish. What happens when the strong choose to protect the weak instead of exploiting them. As if to emphasize her point, an incoming transmission announced the arrival of a delegation from the Crystalline Confederacy. After 3 years of resistance, they were formally requesting membership in the protection zone and offering to contribute their unique resonance technologies to the collective defense network. Ambassador Chen, the Confederacy's representative, transmitted, the Crystalline Confederacy wishes to formally apologize for our opposition to humanitarian efforts. We have observed the prosperity and security that protection zone membership provides, and we would like to contribute to these worthy goals. Sarah's response was gracious but carried an undertone of satisfied vindication. High Coordinator Vex Las, the Terran Federation welcomes the Crystalline Confederacy's change of heart. We look forward to working together to protect innocent life throughout the galaxy. The transformation was nearly complete. The galaxy's major powers were one by one abandoning exploitation in favor of cooperation. Former slave species were developing into thriving civilizations. Most importantly, the systematic atrocities that had characterized galactic civilization for millions of years were becoming historical curiosities rather than daily realities. Dr. Yelnara realized she was witnessing the end of one era of galactic history and the beginning of another. The age of conquest and exploitation was giving way to an age of protection and mutual advancement, and at the center of it all stood humanity, patient teachers who had spent 50 years trying to convince the galaxy to choose justice willingly, and who had demonstrated the power to enforce justice when voluntary compliance proved insufficient. The galaxy would indeed remember when humanity finally lost its patience. But more importantly, it would remember what happened afterward, the day when the strong decided to use their power to protect the weak rather than exploit them. The day when the galaxy learned that true civilization was measured not by how much a species could take, but by how much they were willing to give. The stars themselves seemed brighter now, illuminated by the hope that had replaced the fear that had characterized galactic civilization for so long. And in the observation decks of ships throughout human space, former slaves looked up at those same stars and saw not symbols of distant oppression, but promises of infinite possibility. Humanity had indeed lost its patience with injustice. In doing so, they had given the galaxy something it had never possessed before, a future worth believing in.